that's our tradition. If we may recite the cool way test of the things we think, say, or do, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you, Stephen. President Lisa, fellow Rotarians, and guests. Starting April 5th, 2016, my wife and I spent 30 days in Nepal. Of those 34 days, 24 days were spent trekking in the Himalayas, with the intention of visiting the Gokyo Lakes District and of reaching Everest Base Camp. Our trip to Nepal was the result of both a book and a chance encounter. Like many others, I had developed an interest in Mount Everest with the publication of Into Thin Air, an account of the 1986 Mount Everest disaster, which cost 8 climbers their lives. Then, during a hike with the Lancaster Hiking Club, I met Jerry Lapp, who, as it turns out, arranges trekking trips in the Himalayas. After some research, it seemed to make the most sense for Leslie and I to arrange a customized private rather than a group hike. Jerry mapped out an itinerary for us that featured shorter daily hiking distances and more altitude acclimatization days of 2 overnights rather than 1 spent in the same town. During the hike, the main challenge was that as we advanced to higher and higher elevations, there were fewer molecules of oxygen in the air. Thus the book title, Into Thin Air. As the heart and other organs and muscles strain to meet their oxygen needs, the brain causes you to breathe faster and you feel constantly out of breath. The hike was an excellent cardiovascular workout. Just a word on terminology. The difference between walking, hiking, and trekking, as far as I can see, depends on where you are. You walk the Camino de Santiago in Spain, you hike the Appalachian Trail, and you trek in the Himalayas. The different names depend, it would seem, just on the location. I will use hiking and trekking interchangeably. Dendi Sherpa was our guide. He spoke English, explained what our plans for the day were, arranged accommodations, and acted as a tour guide. Dendi has summited Everest 3 times, as well as all the major peaks in Nepal. Tendi Sherpa was our porter and carried our duffel bags with our clothes. Our duffel bags together were well over 100 pounds. Leslie and I carried day packs with water and additional clothing for the changes and conditions throughout the day. Our day packs were only 5 or 6 pounds, but as elevation increases, any load seems to get heavier. Jerry Lapp is a local Lancastrian who arranged our trip and also met us when we arrived at Gokyo Lakes. My wife Leslie is living proof that you can hike the Himalayas even with bad knees. And that's me somewhere along the trail, obviously at a high elevation because it was cold. You may have wondered why so many people in the Himalayas have the last name Sherpa. Sherpa is firstly an ethnic designation of a group of people who have migrated from Tibet to Nepal over the centuries. When Nepal conducted its first census in 1960, it recorded everyone's first and last name. Since most Sherpas did not have last names, the census takers just put Sherpa in the box for the last name. We started our adventure by flying from Kathmandu to Lukla, which is northwest of Kathmandu and about 40 miles south of Tibet. And Lukla would be down here. We trekked from Lukla to Phakding to Namche Bazaar, which, oops, right there, where we took the left-hand valley and ascended to the Gokyo Lakes District at 15,900 feet. We then retraced our steps towards Namche Bazaar and went up the right-hand valley to Dingboshe, Gorak Shep, and Everest Base Camp at 17,600 feet. My cartographer shorted me 200 feet of elevation on this slide. So we went up this way, came back down, and then went up that way. It took us, I think it took us 20 days to get to base camp. Lukla Airport is located at 9,300 feet in elevation, and the runway has a 12-degree slope to compensate for the short runway of only 1,700 feet in length. It is considered one of the most dangerous airports in the world. Ranked as equally dangerous are the airlines that fly into it. Edmund Hillary and his Sherpa guide, Tenzing Norgay, are credited with the first ascent to the top of Everest in 1953. In an act of remarkable sensitivity, Hillary allowed his Nepalese guide to actually be the first to reach the summit. But were they really the first people to reach the summit? In 1924, 19 years earlier, George Mallory was part of an expedition that attempted to summit Everest. He was sighted by another climber at around 28,200 feet, just 800 feet below the summit. He subsequently vanished until 1999, when Conrad Anker, a noted mountaineer, located his remains. He apparently had died after breaking his leg. Much of his gear and clothes were still with him. The question then became, was Mallory on the way up when he died or on the way down? A number of people have speculated that based on where he was last seen, the amount of oxygen that he had at that point, and where he was found, that he was likely on his way down from the summit. We'll never know for sure, but one intriguing clue was that when he was found, he did not have with him the picture of his wife he had planned to leave at the summit. So here are Leslie and I at the start of our trek. The countryside at lower elevations is very lush and beautiful. It could be anywhere in the world. Buddhist prayer wheels line the path. Inside the wheels, there are written prayers, and by spinning the wheel clockwise, you have effectively recited the prayer. In my write-up for the Rotary transmitter, I mentioned how hospitable the people in Nepal are. This is the family that runs the first inn where we stopped on our way to Namche Bazaar. I watched the father play soccer with his daughter, and his two sisters were very friendly. Inns are called tea houses because they serve tea. The tables are arranged along the walls as the only heat comes from a potbelly stove in the middle of the room. The midday temperature at the beginning of our trek was around 70 degrees, but dropped to the low 40s to the high 30s as we progressed to higher elevations. At night, temperatures dropped about 20 degrees from the noon high. It was sunny every day, which made it feel warmer when outside and in the sun, but it was generally quite cold inside. The day started off clear, but by midday a slight haze arrived, which you will notice in some of my slides. While spring offers the best weather for climbing Everest, fall is the best time for photography, as there tends to be little or no haze. Because of this, I've included a few of Jerry's slides taken in the fall. The white on these trees are actually flowers, although it looked to me like somebody had tied paper flowers to the trees. There are no leaves whatsoever on the trees. We walked along this Khumbu Glacier runoff stream and through the forest on the first part of our second day. The photo does not do justice to the beauty of the locale. Bridges are used to eliminate steep sections across valleys. They are not good for those with a fear of heights. The slats on the bridges are spaced for yak hooves, not for the tread of a hiker. And now you see why. Obviously, the bridges become one way when the yaks are crossing. This is a view of a bridge just before we climbed 2,500 feet from the river to Namche Bazaar. We went over the higher of the two bridges, which is the newer one. That just gives you some idea of the elevation. Climbing this hill was one of the more difficult parts of the trip, as it was not only steep, but at an altitude of 11,300 feet, there's only 65% as much oxygen in the air compared to sea level. We were rewarded for our efforts along the way with our first view of Everest, which is probably about 30 miles away and is in the center rear of this slide. So that would be Everest there. Namche Bazaar historically was a trading town, with Tibetans coming from north to sell their goods such as rugs and carvings. In recent years, the Chinese have prevented Tibetans from crossing the border. There is an Eyes of Buddha shrine in the center left of the picture, which represents the all-seeing ability of the Buddha. And that would be right there. Note the very steep hill above Namche Bazaar. This slide was taken from the hill above Namche Bazaar and captures the steepness of both the hill above as well as the hill below. This is an airstrip on the plain above the hill in the previous picture. The airstrip is only used to ferry material from lower elevations. In the distance, in the upper right-hand corner of the photo, is the lodge, which was the destination that day. And that would be there. This picture was taken by someone else, but it gives an overview of the terrain we just covered, as well as where we're going. Instead of going directly to base camp as shown on this slide, we took the valley to the left of the Everest View Lodge and went to Gokyo. You can notice, very steep hill above Namche Bazaar. The Everest View Hotel at 12,700 feet of altitude was built in the 70s as a luxury lodge and has one of the best views of Everest. They gave us hot water bottles to put in our bed at night, which were greatly appreciated. Everest is in the top right of this picture, and it's probably 20 miles away. On the right is Mount Ama Dablam at 22,300 feet of elevation, which our guide has climbed twice. So that's Everest. This is a close-up of Mount Ama Dablam, which I found to be one of the more interesting mountains in the Himalayas. There are no electric transmission lines above Namche Bazaar, so solar panels are used. This is water being boiled for tea. As we gained altitude, we encountered steps which are used to traverse steep sections of the trail. The stairway ascends steep sections of the route in a zigzag manner and can last for between 1 to 2 hours. The black harness you see on my back is my GoPro camera. I took a lot of videos which I could not use in this presentation. This is a view of additional steps which shows how steep some of them were. While steps were difficult for us, at least we didn't have a heavy load. Porters routinely carry more than their own weight. This is a porter with 6 by 6 inch beams. I don't know how much they weigh, but they are certainly more than the porter's weight. Yaks are an alternative to porters. They have the right of way, and when they pass, you have to make sure you're on the high side of the trail, or they might push you over. This is around 1,400 feet in altitude on our way to Gokyo and above the tree line. It was absolutely beautiful. Gokyo, at 15,900 feet of altitude, is noted for a series of runoff lakes such as this. It was quite cold in the lodge when we had breakfast, and you'll note that I'm wearing my ski pants and have several layers of clothes on my top half. My cell phone is on the table, and somehow or another they were able to have Wi-Fi. The other people at the table are Jerry's wife, children, and some friends of his. One of the difficult tasks at high elevations is climbing stairs after heart rate has returned to normal from the day's hike. We found that we had to rest on a bench on a landing halfway up the stairs when we went up. This is a group picture of Jerry with his family, another couple with their children, and our guides and porters. Just to review, we are in Gokyo now, which is there. And we're going to retrace our path down the valley and take the right-hand valley up to Labouche and Gorak Shep. We could have taken the hypotenuse, which is across there, and gone directly from Gokyo to Gorak Shep, but there's a large hill in the way. And as it turned out, it snowed on the pass that day, the day that we would have hiked. So we made a good decision not to go that way. This picture is notable for the duffel bags in the center right of the picture. Leslie and I each had duffel bags weighing around 50 pounds, which our porter carried as well as his bag. That's right there. This is a way stop on our way to base camp. The sun was brilliant every day, and while the air was cold, the sun made you feel warm, at least when you were outside. The stream to the left is runoff from the Khumbu Glacier, which starts at Everest. Note the steps at the bottom of the slide, which were mercifully short. Labouche is a village on the way to base camp. The villages became smaller as we gained altitude and as fewer people ascend to the higher altitudes. Gorak Shep is the last village before a day hike of 6 miles round trip to Everest Base Camp. Note how much smaller it is than Namche Bazaar. There is a mountain next to Gorak Shep which we climbed to get this view of the top of Everest. It looks very cold. This is at 7 a.m. on April 26th, the day of our trek to base camp. This was the terrain at the beginning of the trek. It looked like a moonscape, and I thought it would be easy. It got a lot harder. It took me 6 hours round trip to do 6 miles. This is about 2 miles from base camp. Khumbu Icefall is in the distance at the middle left of the slide. Right there. And base camp is below the Y-shaped patch of snow. In there. I was surprised to see how steep the icefall was. This is the area in the movie that they traverse with ladders. Everest is behind the triangular peak on the middle left. So it would be behind there. And that peak is actually in Tibet. This is a view of Everest from the trail about 1.5 miles from base camp. I am moving from your right to your left as I approach base camp. Everest becomes hidden behind the triangular peak on your left, which is actually a lower peak on Everest. Think of Everest as being shaped like the Sphinx, with the head being the summit and the tail being the triangular peak to the left. That's the triangular peak. Base camp is the cluster of orange tents in the distance. It is much smaller than I imagined from seeing in the movies. We are actually higher than base camp at this point and have to descend to get there. Khumbu Icefall would be to the right. Like many trails, it turned into a boulder field and isn't really a trail at all. The acts have to take the same route as trekkers. I recall at this point that I was concerned about slipping on some of the ice-covered rocks and breaking my leg. This is a closer view of base camp. I was surprised to see that base camp sits on a glacier, and what looks like soil is just a thin layer of fallen rock on top of the glacier. That was one of the more stunning views that I actually saw. And there's not much of a view of Everest from base camp. In this picture, Everest is a thin sliver poking above the peak on the left. This is a picture of my porter at base camp. The tents would be to your right. Had I been thinking more clearly, I would have lined the shot up better. However, when your brain is oxygen deprived, you don't necessarily think well. The air at 17,600 feet contains 50% fewer molecules of oxygen than at sea level. This is myself at base camp on April 26. My wife got a headache about halfway and turned back with our guide. This is my last slide. This is a picture that was taken by Jerry, and it shows a group going back to Gorak Shep, and it illustrates to me man's struggle against nature and encapsulates what I had just accomplished. What did I get out of my trek? I got a tremendous amount of self-confidence. I achieved what many people half my age could not. I never felt confident ahead of time that I would be able to make it to base camp. However, I learned that my limitations are more mental than physical. And I don't feel that I was at the limit of what I am capable of. Indeed, I'm talking with Jerry about ascending the north side of Everest in Tibet to 21,000 feet. For anyone who is inspired to trek the Himalayas, Jerry has a trip this fall that is oriented to the over 50 demographic and will trek lower elevations and stay in luxury lodges. There is an option to go to base camp as well. Thank you for the opportunity to make this presentation.